Broadcasting live from the Valley of the Sun, Phoenix, Arizona, in the heart of the great American Southwest. It's Erskine Overnight. Now, here's Erskine.
Robert Chapman, the publisher of the International Forecaster. He's a person whom my listeners here in the U.S. love to listen to. He's a person who has a worldwide listenership, especially in Europe, and the European community loves to listen to him because he's the only one telling it the way it is. He examines world economic conditions, major events, and economic trends for intelligent financial planning and investing. He's made me money. He can make you money. He tells you what's really going on. Unbiased, very clear, and he also gives you sources where everything's come from. Mr. Chapman, it is certainly, we've been in for a wild ride the last few years, and you've been telling us where we're going, and you have certainly directed it, been able to show us the direction in which they're taking us. It isn't a pretty direction, is it?
No, it's not, but it's something that we have to deal with, and you can't deal with it unless you are given the truthful information that's necessary to discern what to do and have an idea where the trend is going, why it's going that way, who's making it go that way, and what kind of problems we're going to encounter in the future.
One of the things that you said in this week's International Forecaster, and it comes out twice a week. It's incredible. Get it delivered to your email. Crime pays on Wall Street and banking. Wall Street and banking is where crime pays. These people are untouchable. If they get caught, the shareholders pay the fines. And over 1,000 corporate officers backdated options. Over 1,000 corporate officers backdating options. How many of those ended up in prison, Mr. Chapman?
One. And that's because he wouldn't cooperate with them. He said, no, I didn't do anything wrong. They say, fine, we're going to bury you, and they did. Whether he did anything wrong, I don't know. But I do know all the others did something wrong. And they just paid a fine and went off to do it the next day again.
Senator Carl Levin's come up with something that is going to really upset and shake them up if it would come about. But the number of lobbyists from Wall Street and from the banks on Capitol Hill is 5 times the number of representatives and senators on Capitol Hill. For every representative, Wall Street and the bankers have 5 lobbyists going up to them. That is certainly a bad combination. But Senator Levin wants to change the IRS laws. He wants to take away tax breaks for offshore hedge funds. This would certainly upset them. The transnationals have over $2 trillion offshore. Any chance of this getting through, Mr. Chapman?
Well, I think because the transnationals, along with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, Wall Street and banking, then pharmaceuticals and insurance, they are the big contributors. And they go to the congressman and say, look, we want this passed. And if we don't pass it, you ain't coming back because we're not going to give you any money. And so what are the chances? They're pretty good. What they want is to bring over $2 trillion back into the country, but not pay 35% tax. They want to pay 5.25% again, which is a tremendous loss to the American taxpayer because those tax funds, the difference between $100 billion, and the other figure would be $350 billion, is big. And
oh, yeah.
But these people control everything, and they do what they want. So the chances are good that they'll get it passed and the money will come back in, and they'll use it to buy their stocks again like they did last time 5 years ago, and then they'll run their stocks up and they'll execute their options and walk away with billions of dollars, and that's what this is all about.
The other thing that they don't want to have happen, the bankers in Wall Street, is for Glass-Steagall to be reenacted. Now, Glass-Steagall said the bank has to take care of banking. They can't be gambling. They can't be doing this, that, or the other. They can't have insurance. They can't have all these other businesses. They've got to do the business that they're set up to do, and it narrowly restricts them. And they're not going to let that come back in, but I don't know. I think you're getting a lot of people in Congress who are saying we've got to have Glass-Steagall in and rein these bankers in. I think it's a possibility they may bring it back in. What do you think? Or am I just hoping?
Unfortunately, I think it's hoping. I am pushing the same issue, and I believe that would go a long way to taking us back to balance, a level field, if you may. This is the monster created by Phil Gramm and his wife and a handful of others at the behest of the bankers so they could go in and loot America, which they've done. Dreadful situation over the past 12 years. And the American public doesn't even know what Glass-Steagall is, nor do they care. I would guess even some of the congressmen don't know what it is.
Oh, they better be learning what it is, because that's one of the weapons of mass destruction that's been used by the banks. Now, Mr. Obama is threatening to shut down the government, default on the bonds, and not issue Social Security and Medicare. You had one of the best statements in the International Forecaster I've ever heard. Social Security is not an entitlement. We paid for it. It belongs to us. When they stole money from the Social Security Administration, that basically was a theft. They were taking money from the Social Security, and you say there are ways that they can pay it, issuing bonds and all sorts of different issues. And shutting down the government or defaulting on bonds is not an option constitutionally. Have they completely forgot that they took an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution of the United States of America against all enemies, foreign and domestic? Have they completely, are those words and an oath completely meaningless to our Congress critters?
It all depends on who's paying them. That's how bad it is. 95% of them look to their lobbyists sent to them by the people who supply them with campaign contributions. And they tell them, look, we want this thing defeated, or we want this thing passed. And that's the way it is. It's always been like that. But today, these people in corporate America, not that I'm against corporate America, but it's a fact that they buy everything. And that's wrong.
Now, you're talking about a possibility of 450,000 municipal workers being laid off. If that occurs, are any municipal bonds really a good investment right now? Or are they all just in extreme problems?
I told people over 3 years ago to get out of municipals. And we don't have anybody that's a subscriber that I know of that owns any. I only can think of one person that might have some. And that's it. And they get out at a reasonable time. Those municipals have fallen since. I know that they rallied back on what you would call oversold volume. In other words, they were cheap. People come in and bought them. They've had a rally. And if they don't straighten their house up in these states and municipalities, well, they're not going to be worth anything, or they're going to be worth a lot less than they are now.
7,000 top-rated municipal credits will have ratings cut if the U.S. is downgraded, among other things. More when we get back with Robert Chapman, the international forecaster. One of the big news stories that I've been hearing has been Bank of America and Wells Fargo, who both have agreed to start reimbursing investors for mortgage losses. How can they do that and stay afloat? Mr. Chapman, isn't this because they've got millions, billions in mortgage losses where they basically swindled people? They are not admitting guilt. They're paying them back the money. How are they paying them back the money, and what's going on with this deal?
Well, I don't know exactly how the payment system's been set up or whether it's already started. It's going to be expensive, but I don't know what the numbers are either. I do know that the AGs in the states are arranging for the banks to pay a fine of about $25 billion. And that's a number of banks are involved in that. And I don't know where they're going to get the money. That is a substantial amount.
I know where they're going to get the money, yes.
But, the hook on this is this, that money is not going to go to the individuals, the $25 billion. It's going to go to the states. And they're not going to reimburse anybody because they're broke and they need the money. And then they're going to give the bankers immunity. Immunity, which means they know they're guilty of fraud, conversion, and God knows what else. And so, illegally, from my point of view, these people at the state level and district attorney's offices, and they're saying, no, we want to make a deal. We need the money. We don't care what we have to do to get it. And the bankers are saying, you protect us and we'll give you the money.
Wow. So that's a get-out-jail-free card.
That's right. And, how does the inhabitants of these different states, and I think every state's involved, how can they allow their attorney general to do such things?
It's like you or I going in, if we rob a bank, and then they say, okay, give us back 50 cents on the dollar and you can go free and you've got nothing on your record. That's basically what it's doing. The difference is the banks robbed us, and they're allowed to give back maybe 20 cents on the dollar, and then they're saying, don't even give it to us, give it to the state, and then go away. You're free. That's basically what's happened, isn't it?
Well, that just happened in the negotiations over in Europe with the bailout, we'll call it, of Greece. The German public said, no, we're not going to do that unless the bankers take 20% of the losses, well, actually 21 to be exact. And the bankers fought them all the way, and what Germany said to them, look, you're all going under if you don't play ball this way, because the German public's not going to put up with it, and they're the ones who are supplying the lion's share of the money that's going to bail out Greece. And if Greece doesn't work, which I don't think it will, I think it's going to blow up in their faces, and everything hasn't been passed yet. There's a rigmarole that they have to go through. But it's the same problem. The banks made loans that they should have never made in the first place. And they know that.
Well, Greece
and they want the public to pay for it, just like they do in the United States.
Greece was just downgraded by Fitch to junk status. And a meeting that they had a couple of weeks ago on Greece, it was interrupted an hour into the meeting, and they said, we've got an emergency meeting, another emergency meeting on Italy. And so that was in the middle of the meeting that they had on Greece, and that went till 7 o'clock that night, and what a mess that was. One of the things that you talk about is central banks. They're buying gold in the first 6 months more than all of 2010. Mexico bought $4 billion in gold in May. And an interesting story, the University of Texas just bought $1 billion worth of gold. They transferred their endowment into gold. Smart move on the University of Texas, Mr. Chapman?
Yes, there's another, if it's not the same entity, that did the same thing about a year and a half or 2 years ago.
Wow. They doubled their money, didn't they?
And then Northwestern Life, about 2 to 3 years ago, bought a substantial amount of gold as well. And then starting in February and March, the Mexican government bought about $5 billion worth of gold. They bought about 100 tons. And so, there's a lot of participants in there that you would have never expected to be there that have recognized a number of things. And that's important because it proves to people that they aren't the only ones who see what they see, and many of these people are professionals. I mean, look at the price of gold.
I think many of them are reading the International Forecaster.
It could be. But many of them realize that something's dramatically wrong. They're finding out that gold is usually a safe investment, and especially at this time, when you have currencies falling 11 years in a row by over 20% with both gold and silver. I mean, that's the proof of the pudding is right there. And it's going to continue because the U.S. and other nations are going to continue through their central banks to print money and credit. They're not going to stop.
Now, another issue I wanted to bring up is how stupid is our government. They have Operation Fast and Furious, Operation Castaway in Florida, the Bureau of Alcohol and Tobacco Tax and Firearms, the ATF, some of the weapons. The deal was they were going to give them weapons, follow the weapons to the people who were going to get them, and then get the weapons down from the U.S. to Mexico. So they release all the weapons, and the weapons go to the drug dealers, and they never get them. That is certainly bad in and of itself. Agent, Brian Terry, was murdered in Mexico with one of the weapons. The weapons are now showing up on the streets in Phoenix. The weapons from the Operation Castaway in Florida are now showing up in Puerto Rico and Colombia in murders there. So is the U.S. just supplying these terrorist organizations, these narco republics, these narcotic traffickers with their weapons? That's exactly what they did. Who's been punished for this? And it goes ultimately up to Eric Holder, the Attorney General of the United States. Anybody taking any responsibility for this idea? And what the president's answer to it is, hey, the states of Oklahoma, or states of Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, and California, you can only buy two weapons, two long guns in those states at a time. That's it, because so much is being transferred down to Mexico. It's being transferred by the government itself. And how does the president come in with an edict that's only against 4 states? Are we right into tyranny right now? More when we get back with Robert Chapman and that question, Operation Fast and Furious, and what the president's doing and who's had any responsibility for it. The president puts out what becomes rule of law against 4 states only, saying that you can't purchase more than 2 weapons in those states. He's doing gun control against 4 states when it's the federal government who did it. It was like the president saying, okay, all you in Rhode Island, you can't raise chickens. Excuse me, you can't make a rule for one state. You can't do it that way. It just isn't done that way. No regard at all for the Constitution. Plus, on this Operation Fast and Furious and Castaway, doesn't it ultimately go up to the Attorney General? Isn't this a nightmare scenario that they created? Mr. Chapman, comment on it, please, sir.
Well, it sure is, and it's an absolute disgrace. In this case, it's professional government agencies led astray by the Justice Department, the President of the United States. I mean, they have become criminals. These people should be put on trial for what they've done.
Absolutely. There's no question in my mind that they should be put on trial. Is Congress not looking at this? It's one thing this is absolutely the president not only proposing, but issuing this edict against 4 different states, only 4 states, totally unconstitutional. The Attorney General letting such a thing happen. I mean, this happened under Nixon or any other president, and they would have been bounced out there so fast it'd make your head spin, wouldn't it? Is he just a Teflon president?
I think he is, but all of them have been for a long time. I think the presidents that they've had real problems with were Eisenhower and Jack Kennedy. The rest of them, they just all fall in line and do what they're told.
One of the things that you said, and I thought this was superb, Social Security is not an entitlement. We paid for it. It belongs to us. And you said that there's a PSYOPs operation to force presidents on his demands not to cut the budget, but to spend and spend and spend. So the thing is, the whole Social Security, this should not ever be on the table. Whether or not we pay back our debts, that should not be on the table. It's not constitutional to default on public obligations. None of this stuff should be on the table. This shouldn't be even up for debate, should it?
No, it should not. And they do what they want to do. That's the problem.
What choice do we have? What choice do we as people have? I mean, you can't vote them all out, can we? Or I know we should, but what choice do we have in the United States today when it's controlled by these banksters are controlling our government? What choice do we have as people?
Well, I think that perhaps in the next election were Ron Paul to be elected president would signify that there had to be a change. And the reason why that might happen, other than the fact that he's certainly the most qualified person to be president, the people who have created this monster, and it is a monster, what they have done is, long ago, they painted themselves into a corner, and they realized that, and they were very cognizant of this, that if they're going to make something work, they better make it work because they can't go back. They can't resurrect what they've torn down easily without exposing themselves. And that's what's very, very important in this episode. And I would think if they can't control the system and can't bring it down the way they want, they might try to arrange that Ron Paul gets elected so that the blame for all of the problems will go on that administration and that president. That's the only thinking I can get out of it that might help or assure him of election. I don't even think Ron has thought of that. But I think that would be the take on that. And if that happened, we would be able to make changes, perhaps even radical changes, to change things for the better. And the people who did what they did and caused all these problems would be able to hide from retribution, because anybody that is in Congress at that time, particularly the president, if it was Ron Paul, would not be interested in retribution. The job would be so overwhelming to keep the economy from going under that you wouldn't want to deal with that at that time, and those people who shouldn't have done what they did might get away with it. And so that's something to be considered.
Absolutely, it is. And I think, just like people before Obama were able to get away with what they did because Obama just followed their policy. So more and more of the same begets more and more of the same. With the foreclosures, you're looking for 1 million more foreclosures next year. Without tariffs, are we ever going to bring this country back, Mr. Chapman?
It is impossible. And that's part of their plan. So if you see Ron Paul and some other conservatives get elected, and they take up free trade, and they put tariffs on goods and services, you'll know that America has turned the corner, and they have a chance of economically and financially surviving as a first world nation. I think it all depends, too, on the dollar. Will it remain the world reserve currency? If you'd asked me this question 3 or 4 years ago, I would have said no. But in light of what I see now, there's a chance that they'll have a big meeting and there'll be devaluations and revaluations, and there'll be defaults. And after that's over, the people who run America from behind the scenes, the bankers, they'll say, well, now that we get that out of the way, we want to keep the dollar as the international currency. In order to do this, we're going to back it 15% with gold. And that could very well happen. And the game would be on again.
The thing about the dollar is, as long as it's controlled by the Federal Reserve, we haven't got a say about what happens. Because Federal Reserve is the QE2, where they gave out money to banks, especially the European banks. People were thinking it was given out to help small businesses in the U.S., but it was given out as a bailout to European banks. That should have been headline news across the country, what the Federal Reserve did. And people would have been up in arms against the Federal Reserve and said, look, you're giving our money to bail out European banks? They would have been up in arms. But we didn't hear it anywhere. This was kept so quiet. We really need to get rid of the Federal Reserve system, don't we?
We should do, and those tasks would be returned to the Treasury Department from whence they came in the first place. Now, mind you, during the period up to 1913, Treasury departments had only done a fair to poor job at managing the monetary aspects of America. But
we'll be right back on Erskine Overnight. If the European banks go under, which many of them will, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about that, will the U.S. banking system necessarily go under? In other words, are we going to have a repeat of the Great Depression where an Austrian bank went under and that signaled a domino effect around the world? Or can Europe go under, and England, of course, is part of Europe, English go under, and the U.S. still remain solvent? Or, well, we aren't solvent now, but remain with our head above water. Can this happen, or is it going to be worldwide, and will it also take in Canada and China and Russia and all the other countries? What's going to happen? What's your scenario that you see? Because the European banks can't stay afloat given the situation.
Well, you were referring to credit Anstalt, and that was an unforeseen event. I call them untoward events that nobody ever expected to happen. And we could have another one like that. We could wake up one morning and J.P. Morgan Chase could say, we can't make it anymore, we're going to have to go out of business. And that's possible, but it's certainly at this moment not probable. And so it could become probable. And that's what those events are about. Things that happen that aren't supposed to happen. Well, it's just like stuff happens.
Right.
And so they don't know, and we don't know whether something is going to happen. But based upon nothing untoward happening, the situation is dreadful. All kinds of things have to be done. The first thing is all of those bankrupt banks and other companies have got to be allowed to go bankrupt. It's part of our system. And second of all, we have to purge the entire system of malinvestment, and we have to allow companies to go under, and we have to get rid of that trash by purging the system. In classical economics, it's the only thing that works. Period.
Yeah, the system of interest has taken everything down, and the system of the debt that they've had built up has taken everything down. The new system that they're thinking about bringing is technocracy, where they're using energy as credits, but I don't see that that's going to fly. Do you?
At the moment, it will not pass. What they'll do to change that to make it pass, I don't know. It's political theater, and now they've taken it so far that everybody involved is going to be a loser. A lot of people are not coming back to Congress after the election a year from November. And so they've really overdone it. And there's going to be a lot of consternation among people. I mean, he is working on this thing since May 16th, so that's 2 months, and you've gotten nowhere. Well, why didn't they get anywhere? Well, it's pretty simple. They're not stupid. They're getting paid off by people. And the people who are paying them off with their campaign contributions and lobbying and et cetera, all the little things that they do, they say, no, we don't want that. We want you to continue what's going on, tremendous deficits, so we can sit back and make piles of money. And that's really what it's all about. And the public is going to realize that and may have already. And so what's the next step? Throw them all out. Try to get them to do it last time. We did okay, but we didn't come anywhere near what we should have done. And that's the key, legally and through the system. And if we can't do it that way, I'll tell you right now, America's going to end up in revolution.
The people were right in Kentucky, and our listeners at WBLK know this, when they had the campaign last time to ditch Mitch McConnell, the Ditch Mitch campaign, because his plan is a scam. There are no cuts in spending, and it would destroy the dollar. The McConnell plan that everyone's talking about, oh, well, it'll keep us running for an extra 3 or 4 months. It's an absolute scam. It is not good at all. The guy shouldn't even call himself a Republican with this type of plan.
Well, I think he would be better adept at collecting garbage.
No question about it. No question about that.
I mean, I can't believe that they would even present such a cockamamie plan. It's ridiculous. I mean, there's no real cuts there. There's no real tax increases. Smoke and mirrors that have been discovered before the smoke and mirrors happened. And, you know, as it stands, they probably are not going to make August the 2nd. And they can extend it. And I think that they might very well do that. But no matter what they do, we're going to still be saddled with the same underlying problems, the same underlying direction, and the same rotten system that hasn't worked because they won't allow it to work.
There seems to be absolutely no accountability, and this is one of the major problems, that we have no accountability with Congress, we have no accountability with our corporations or anything. And if they do have accountability, like with the banks, they change the rules. And that certainly isn't the American way, that you do that. They just flat change the rules and say, okay, you have 2 sets of books. And they're allowing it, aren't they?
They certainly are. The United States government, the Bank for International Settlement.
Unemployment, 22.6%. There's 20.6 million. Stimulus 1 and 2, QE 1 and 2, $44 trillion. And we have an unemployment rate of 22.6%. Inflation, 10.6%, going to 14%. We've got to have something. This balloon is about to pop. They keep building up the stock market. Why, Mr. Chapman, did they keep building up the stock market? Why don't they let it go reach the levels it should?
Because it's probably, beside the bond market, the only places left where there is wealth. Commercial as well as residential real estate has been destroyed by what they did, which was giving loans to people who shouldn't have them at both levels. And so the market has to stay up if they can keep it up. And the bond market, which is 100 times bigger than the stock market, is at a 34-year high. Now, how much longer can it stay there? I don't know, but chances are not an awful lot longer. And we could see the beginnings coming from outside the country of increased interest rates. And if that happens, the game changes very negatively. And I think that is what's going to happen over the next 2 or 3 years. And the game that they're playing is going to start coming apart. And that will affect the stock market as well. Where will it go? At the moment, I don't know, but I think 8,500 to 10,000 on the Dow would be easy. Their manipulation of the commodity market is coming to an end. Their manipulation of gold and silver prices are coming to an end. And that's going to attract money, as it has in the immediate past, from stock and bond markets.
With all the crops, what's happening to them, with all the heat that's happening and the droughts, I look for commodities to go up, coming up close soon, don't you?
And that will assist in inflation on the upside in conjunction with what the Fed has already done. We're already seeing the results of QE1 and Stimulus 1 right now, this year. We'll see 14%. It's 10.6% right now, not the 3.6% the government talks about. Next year, 25 to 30% based upon QE1, QE2, and Stimulus 2. Now, if they go to QE3, which they must, and they inject $850 billion plus buy the treasuries, they're going to be in for $2.3 trillion. What's that going to do? It's going to take inflation up to 50%, and that's called hyperinflation.
It's going to be worse than when Mr. Reagan took over following Jimmy Carter, when we had 24%, 21.5% prime rates. This is where it's going, and especially with the droughts and everything, the inflation is almost inevitable, isn't it?
Well, we've got it, and it's going to get worse.
Mr. Chapman, thank you.